Hi there. Today in Typical Books, we'll be talking about writing a short story the like a movie method. I don't know really what to call it. So, you could call this method of short story writing sit your butt down and write, bum in seat, pen in hand, go. You just simply write. You writing on inspiration. I am loath to use the terms I don't even want to say them. It feels dirty in my mouth to say pantser. I don't know why. I've met people that don't like saying the word squat, and it makes them kind of throw up a little in their mouth. And that's how I feel about that word. Um, I don't like that word and never will. It feels contrived. It feels like a Tumblr word. But yeah, so to just sit down and simply write on inspiration the old fashioned way, the all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy sort of method of writing. Just sitting down and simply writing. Now, these are the steps that I take to write a short story when I'm not stuck and I just simply can write. I had watched a Kelly Martin Books video about noveling, and hello to Kelly Martin, a new subscriber and a mutual subscribee of mine. Um, wow, she was talking about noveling, which is something kind of different in a way, but the steps are the same. Writing is writing, especially when it's going on inspiration, putting your butt in a seat. People often ask novelists how they write. How do you write? And it sounds like too lackluster to say, I don't know, I just sit down and I write, right? So they're looking for something magical. And that's why there's, us talking about writing. We always talk about writing. And that's a lot of why I like to talk about writing and why I'm talking about writing on my show. Because I do like to talk about books, but I really, like any writer, like to talk about writing and listening to other writers talk makes me think more about the steps that we take. And when you say, how do you write a novel? I sit down and I write it. There's no real steps to take with this sort of method. When you're not stuck, when you're not on deadline, when you just have a story to write. But there are, when you think about it, a few things, a few tips that will help along with this. She had phrased it, I write it like a movie. I just write every novel like a movie. I sit down at the beginning and I write like a movie, and it made a lot of sense, and that's the best way to describe like when it's coming to you and you're able to write. You write it all in one go. You write it with no stop. You write beginning to end when it's a short story, because you can do that. Whoever has written a novel from beginning to end is insane. We've sat down as booktubers and read a novel from beginning to end, and I saw that in Reading Rush, to read a whole book from beginning to end in one spot. Some people are breaking up time wise, but I've read a whole novel, People Live Still in Cashtown Corners, all in one sitting, all in one spot for 4 hours because it's short, luckily. You can't write a novel like that, but so you got to learn how to pause your brain a little tiny bit for interruptions that may be a whole day or a week. You never know, right? So with a short story, though, you're lucky because you may be able to just bang that out in 4 hours. You might be able to write the whole thing beginning to end, depending on what your writing speed is. And I'm not going to really talk too much about people's word per minutes and stuff like that, because that varies. But there are some things to sort of up that speed that aren't, sneaky tips and tricks. And it's not called Hacks to Writing Fast. That's not the title of this video. But it is just yet another method. Now, I've discovered a different channel as well that I've been watching, Horror with Marchese and Buller. And we had a little conversation back and forth in comments about techniques to writing. And yeah, there definitely are many different ways to write a short story. And using a point form note method is just one when you're kind of trying to force one out. This is not forced at all. This is when you get to sit down and just write. And there are some roadblocks, interruptions, not having time, having something in the plot that is just not working out, that might, if you just start writing, just sit down and start writing, it will come to you. The story will tell you what to write. So you have to not worry about that. Style wise, oh my. If you don't like writing dialogue, you might, just write it really clunky. That's fine. Just get it out. If it starts being all dialogue, that's fine too. You can go back and edit in some extra things. You have to write what is coming to mind. Put the thesaurus away. Write whatever words come to mind first. Even if you have to write three in a row, don't bother going back to delete them. Have run on sentences. That's fine. So yeah, Just sit down and write. Now, you can write with music or without. Some authors cannot write with music and they can't envision why other people can. And some authors need music. That silence just scrambles around in their brain and their brain just goes in too many directions. They need to focus. So they need music, and that's what they've trained themselves. Pavlovian, perhaps, but it works for them. Same sort of thing as people who have to sleep with white noise and cannot sleep with white noise. Fans on, no fans on. It's just a matter of taste, and it's also what you've trained yourself to do, what you do to get into that writerly mode, I suppose, if you need that. Some writers don't. So, I've two examples of each there, and they're both stories that came to me all in one package and were able to be written in all one sitting like a movie, to use Kelly's term. Now, As Is, Where Is was written all in one sitting. There was a little lunch break in there, but I didn't write over my lunch break. And it was sort of, I was able to sit in my living room in utter silence with nothing but the sounds of muffled street traffic, but pure silence. And I believe that fed the mood of that story. As Is, Where is something like 7,000 words. It's quite long. This was a long sit. I don't remember how long, but it was like mid morning till dinner time ish, with a small break in between. But it was just like a movie, the entire story. Now, later on, there was a substantial edit where two scenes were sort of flip flopped entirely from beginning to end. And there was maybe 3 drafts of light editing going on in that. Not a heck of a lot, though. I was lucky in that it came out pretty clean. And that's one thing between, writing a story all in one go. It could come out super clean if you're lucky like that, or it could come out as a jumbled mess. But that doesn't matter. It's the idea of just getting out what's going on in your mind like a movie. You got to tell it scene by scene, line by line, as it is presented in your mind. And, whether you stumble with a dialogue or things like that I'd said, it doesn't matter. You just need to sit down and write it. And that's what I did with As Is, Where Is. And even if it was coming up with words, the terms were things I didn't research, didn't pop open Google and take a look. I just mostly went from what I knew. And this method really plays well with write what you know, because you're just going to be filling in with your innate vocabulary. You're going to be filling in with your own experiences because you're simply writing and you're focused on only that. And this being quiet in a little old quasi haunted brownstone really lent itself to that story, as did the silence. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum entirely, I wrote Jack in the Box, which is sort of a, the genesis of a serial killer and a young boy sort of story. And I wrote that late at night, opposite of As Is, Where Is, day and night, with music, where I'd written the other in silence. I chose a soundtrack. If you don't write with music very often and want to try, I highly recommend soundtracks. Some people would say classical music, same sort of idea, things with no lyrics. If you're writing a surf punk zombie killing spree, try The Ventures or something. But I chose the soundtrack to the movie Maniac. The soundtrack is by Rob, and it is extremely atmospheric. And it just lends itself really well to these sort of creepy thoughts that I was having with this story. And I think it fed the genesis of a serial killer, where I'm writing, envisioning where this kid would go someday, perhaps. And not about exactly what he would be doing as an adult, but what would feed those sort of thoughts as a young boy. And which is tough because I'm not a young boy. I never was. So it's hard for me to really wrap my head around that. And I feel kind of badly putting the finger on things that would, be that McDonald triad or whatever, my own Peaver triad of what creates a serial killer, which is totally different than the one we know. Now, that soundtrack, which was given to me at the time by my future husband, Chris, was so wonderful because I love that film and I could just envision all these horrible things, whether it was subconscious or not. So the choice of music was deliberate and really worked well with what I was writing. And I was able to sit down in only 2 passes of a very short movie soundtrack. I think it's about 40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes. So in 2 passes of that soundtrack, I wrote what I guess about 4,000 words or something like that. And it was the entire story. It had some edits after for sure, but it was the complete story with such a controlled and tight tone. I was very proud of that, and I'm even pretty proud of the accomplishment of just writing something beginning to end. So I definitely recommend trying it. If you've never written with music, maybe try something like that where you pick a piece that fits with what this idea you have is, or try the absolute silence method. The biggest roadblocks to this are your own mind and your Zen consciousness, your Zen level. If you can focus, if you have problems focusing, this is going to be tough. If you have things that will help you trick, like the ticking of a clock or timer, that would help, things like that. Pull all those tricks out of the bag and try that. Music is definitely helpful. If you've never written with music, definitely try. If you haven't written in silence, definitely try. But the big pain in the ass with all of that is the time. You know what your word per minute on average is when you're really cooking. The point of this is that you're going to be really cooking from the beginning to end, right? You're not going to be sitting there chewing on your pencil eraser or whatever it is you do, that idly clacking keys or whatever to kill time while you stare at a blank screen, which in my previous video talked about how that just doesn't happen and shouldn't ever happen. This is, you're going to be really cooking. So whatever is the fastest words per minute you've ever really come up with, this is about what you're looking at. So if it takes you a half hour to write 1,000 words, then plan on 4 hours. You got to find a day where you've got really lots of time to do this sort of thing. Even if it means pulling the heroic hours in the morning when you wake up at 4 a.m. or trying to stay up late and do them, whatever works for you. I may talk about some of the back and forths of doing that, writing early in the morning, writing late at night, because I've done both of those too. And maybe some editing things, because I've touched on editing but left it alone because that doesn't fit into this. This is about sitting down and just writing like a movie. So I highly recommend the Marquesium Buller show and Kelly Martin's show. So definitely go check them out and enjoy writing. If you have any other tactics to tack on to this, let me know in the comments. And of course, if you haven't ever tried this and are going to, let me know how it pans out. If this is exactly how you write, I would love to know too, because it's always fascinating to me the way that people get short stories out, because we're not necessarily robots and can't always write the exact same way all the time. So when someone does, I'm very curious. Like if James Patterson wrote short stories, I think we'd be drowning in the things because he is a robot. Also, you may have noticed I've been doing a few more author-to-be things. I may do some author-to-be tags, but I'm going to definitely keep a focus on books and book reading. This may become a more popular thing though, author eccentric videos, as I go through the summer, because I'll be teaching soon and not having a heck of a lot of time, because 1 day a week is definitely given over entirely to students and a lot of my time in the evenings. So I normally record on Thursdays, and I'll be recording 2 videos like I've been doing on Thursdays and trying to stagger the release of them, although I'm impatient and I like to just get them out as I edit them. I might be trying to sort of cram as many videos into a session as I can, and quite a few of those will be writer tube centric, depending on how fast I can read books. I do have a novella by Eric Hofstadter coming up too, so novellas might be the thing. I should have mentioned this in my previous video, but if you want to recommend any novellas to me to help me through the school year so that I have more time to read by reading shorter fiction. So if you know of any novellas that you'd like me to read, throw them my way. Above all, have a nookie spooky day.